See if I'm on here. It looks like I am. Awesome. What's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, Wall Street Mastermind. We're back with our weekly live stream for you guys. I'm just going to make sure that the live is happening on all the platforms. We are streaming concurrently on Facebook, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. So let me just check real quick to make sure that that is happening before we get started. Check real quick to make sure that, okay, looks like YouTube is live. Just give me 1 second here, guys. We get all set up. If you guys can hear me, do me a favor and just drop a comment down below and let me know. Because sometimes we have issues with the sound, and I want to make sure that I'm not just talking to myself. Okay. So it looks like we're live. So yeah, drop a comment down below if you can hear me. And then also, I did want to, I should probably announce this, but I did want to, I should have said this in an email. I did want to do like a live edit for one of you today on your tell me about yourself answer. Okay. It's basically the most important question that you'll get asked in a banking interview. So let me, in fact, for the people that are joining late, let me put this on the screen here. So bottom line is, I wrote this in the description, but if you guys want me to edit your tell me about yourself answer, then I would send me a draft of your answer. Hopefully you have it written now somewhere already. Send me a draft in a Word document, okay? And send it to my email at sam at wallstreetmastermind.com. And the street is abbreviated to ST. Okay, so it's sam at wallstmastermind.com. And what I'll do is, well, depending on how many answers we get, but I'll try to pick one that we can all go over together. In fact, let me put this up on the screen so that you guys can see it. Oops. Give me 1 second, sorry. Okay. Cool. Here we go. Put this up on the screen. There we go. There's the info. Okay. So anyway, do that, right? Send it over if you guys want me to review it for you. And then I will save some time at the end of this to go over one of these answers that you guys send over. Okay. So anyway, let's get started. So for those of you who are new to this, my name is Sam. I do one of these live streams every week. I'm the founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Over the last 3 years, roughly now, we've worked with over 350 students to help them break into investment banking. Over 90% of them have succeeded in doing so so far. And we've also spoken to thousands of students because the vast majority of the students that we speak with, we don't actually end up working with, but we still speak to them. We do what's called a strategy session, which you guys can also sign up for as well if you want. It's a 45-minute free call with our team to just really diagnose what's going on with your recruiting process and see what it is that you need help with, right? So and it just give you our thoughts on what you should do and if or how we might be able to help. So but regardless, we've spoken to thousands of students. I've personally worked with over 350 of them, Of the ones out of that who have finished the recruiting process, meaning, they're not underclassmen, about 90%, just over 90% of them have successfully broken into investment banking. So we've learned a lot. And part of the purpose of this live stream is to basically share with you guys some of the things that we're doing that's been so successful, so that you guys can see what we're about. And also, if you want to, take what we learn and obviously, or take what we've learned and apply it to what you're doing, right? So today, what we're going to be talking about is the behavioral portion of the interview. Okay, so there's several different areas that you have to master for investment banking recruiting, but I would say the behavioral interview is probably one of the most important parts, but it's also one of the most neglected parts of the recruiting process, I would say. And again, this is from having spoken to so many students, and we always ask them, and we kind of get a sense for what people are concerned about and what people aren't really worried about. I would say this is one of the things that people are less worried about, just because I think there's two reasons for that. One, people have this idea that, well, with the behavioral interviews, there's only so much you can do, right? Like, you pretty much go look up the questions that the bankers are going to ask you, and then you will try to write out the best answers that you can. And you just practice those answers, by yourself, with your friends, with your parents, with whoever, a couple times until you feel comfortable delivering it. And then you go in with those answers to the interviews, right? And so for most people, they feel like, hey, once they've done that, then it's enough, right? And then what people do is they spend most of their time, more likely, learning the technical part of the interview, because that part is also a lot scarier, right? If you go into an interview and you don't know how to answer a technical question, it's very obvious that you don't know it, right? Because there's actually a right answer, a wrong answer. Whereas for the behavioral interview, if you go into an interview and you don't know how to answer the behavioral question, most people, what they think is, well, then I'll just make something up on the spot. I'll just go off the cuff and think of something, because it's just, after all, it's just talking about yourself, right? So how difficult can that really be? In reality, this is a pretty big mistake, just because the behavioral interview actually, in a couple different reasons. One, it moves your behavioral interview skills actually move the needle a lot more when it comes to your networking efforts, as opposed to the technical interview, right? Like, once in a while, when you're networking with bankers, they might ask you some technical questions as well. But in general, that's pretty rare, right? What is a lot more common is if in the course of the conversation, obviously you're asking them questions, but they're trying to get to know you as well. So they're going to ask you questions, right? They're going to say, hey, so tell me about yourself. Or they're going to say, hey, so why are you interested in investment banking, right? Or what specifically about our bank appeals to you, right? Or, tell me about a time when you did, X, Y, or Z, right? Like, whatever it may be. And so even though you might think that you're just chatting with them, in reality, what they're doing when they ask you these questions is they're evaluating you, right? It's really not that different from an actual interview, because the answers that you give them during that conversation will basically determine whether they want to help you or not, right? If you really impress them, if you're really likable and they think you're a great candidate, they're going to be more likely to help you out, go out of their way, like whether it's, referring you to someone else that you should talk to, or better yet, like if they have the type of influence, actually like helping you get the interview, right? Like, we've had that happen for many of our clients, right? So that's one, is that without good behavioral answers, you're just not going to be able to have the type of conversations that you want to have with the bankers when you're networking. And if you're not networking effectively, then you're not going to get referrals, which means you're relying purely on your resume, purely on the applications that you submit online to get you the interview. And that's a losing proposition, right? Because most of these banks, especially the top ones, like if you're talking about bulge bracket or elite boutique banks, the ones that most of you would like to get into, they get upwards of 100+ resumes for every job opening that they have, right? So that's the first part of why the your behavioral interview answers are so important. The second part is the actual behavioral interview itself, right? If I asked you which is more important, the behavioral interview or the technical interview, because you're gonna have both, right? Maybe not all in like the same 30-minute interview, but if you were to get an offer somewhere along the way through whether the first round or the super day, like at some point you're gonna get asked both behavioral and technical questions, right? And so based on the amount of time that most students are allocating to the behavioral and the technical questions, you would think that the technicals must be more important, right? In reality, that's actually not true, right? Because we've seen, and we have a very large sample size on this again, right? Because we've worked with over 300+ students. Like we've seen time and time again, people who have gotten offers, even though they didn't get every single technical question right during the interview. Like we just had a client today who told us that he just got an offer from Houlihan Lokey for the summer 2022 internship process, right? Most of you guys, if you're sophomores, you know that the summer 2022 application have already opened up at probably over 20 different banks, and certain banks like Houlihan Lokey at this point have actually already started giving out offers, right? So that's how quickly things are moving. And so we told you about this client last week, I think on the live stream, where we said, he already had the super day this past Friday, and sure enough, earlier today he received his offer, right? But he's a perfect example where he actually didn't nail every single technical question that he got. I think he might have missed one or two, but he absolutely crushed his behavioral questions, right? So we see that a lot, where if you do really, really well on your behaviorals, but you do not as well on the technical side, they'll cut you some slack, right? Because all the technical stuff can be taught. Don't get me wrong, you still need to know your technicals, but it's not the end of the world if you mess up on not something super basic, but if you mess up on something that's maybe a bit more obscure, a bit more advanced, a bit more complex. Sometimes they're just kind of testing you to see like how far they can push you and how much you really know, not because they expect you to get every single question correctly, right? But the thing that we have never seen is we have never seen anyone do poorly or do just average on the behavioral side of things, but then do extremely well on the technical side and actually get the offer, right? Like that never happens. Okay. And I think the reason why that never happens is because if you do poorly on the behavioral side and fundamentally they just don't like who you are as a person, then they couldn't care less how good you are at technicals because they don't want to work with you, right? You're not someone that they can see as a part of the team. You're not someone that they feel like they want to, spend 80 to 100 hours a week in the office with, right? And so the behavioral questions, also, the last thing I'll say about this is it typically comes up first, right? Whether it's the higher view interview, most of those questions are behaviorals. And if you don't pass that, you're not even getting to the in-person interviews, right? You're not getting to that stage. The other thing is, even if you get to the in-person stage, typically they'll start out with behavioral questions, things like usually by asking, tell me about yourself, right? Which is why I say that's the most important question, because literally if your answer to that question is good, you will make a very good first impression. And then the rest of that interview will feel a lot easier, right? Whereas if you make a poor first impression, the rest of that interview will feel like you're trying to, skate uphill, so to speak, right? It's like there's just a lot of resistance, right? Because what will happen is what the interviewers are doing psychologically, and what we all do as human beings, is that once we establish our first impression of someone, which usually happens probably within the first 15 to 30 seconds of us meeting them, right? You guys do this too. Just think about every new person you've ever met. subconsciously you automatically establish like a first impression, whether you like the person or not, right? The rest of your time interacting with them, you're already biased, right? What you're doing then is you are just looking for, your brain is looking for evidence to validate what you already think about that person, right? And so if someone likes you because you have really good behavioral answers, really good telling me about yourself, then for the rest of the interview, let's say even if you were to trip up on a technical question, the interviewer in their head, they're justifying, they're rationalizing that by saying, well, that's fine. It's not a big deal. Like the question he missed is pretty hard, or yeah, I wasn't really expecting him to get that one anyway, right? They'll do something like that. Whereas the flip side is also true, where if your behaviorals are bad and they already decided based on the first answer that they don't really like you, or they don't really like the answer, or you're not that impressive, the rest of the interview, they're looking for just any reason they can have to ding you, right? So now if an interviewer really wants to ding you, it's very easy for them to do, because all they have to do is just keep asking you harder and harder questions until you mess up eventually, which you will. And then when you do mess up, that gives them enough reason to say, okay, well, this person's not qualified, right? So that's the importance of the behavioral interview, right? So I think I've said enough about that. So now let me walk through just kind of like the 4-step process that our students are using to make sure that they really nail their behaviorals, okay? And then after I go through the 4-step process, I want to make sure that I save some time for this live edit. And I'm starting to get some submissions now from you guys. So, for those of you, again, if you're interested in getting your answer edited live, feel free to email that over to me. And, I probably only have time to do one. So I'll pick one to use as an example. And then, we can if we still have more time after that, we can also save time for some Q&A afterwards. Okay. So let's dive into it. The 4-step process is really quite simple, right? The first step is you have to know what questions to expect. Okay, what questions are going to be asked in the technical, in the behavioral interviews, right? Because if you don't know what questions to expect, then a lot of the times, probably like half the time or maybe more than half the time when people mess up, is because they get what they think it's a curveball question, right? Like, I wasn't really expecting this. And then they're having to think on the spot. Like if someone says, hey, tell me about a time when you failed at something. It's a pretty basic question, but let's say you weren't prepared for that. Like you didn't think about that ahead of time. Now you're having to think on the fly of a time when you failed, and you're feeling the time pressure because you're sitting there and you're feeling like, I got to come up with something. And most likely, unless you're just really, really good at improvising and you're really, really good at bullshitting, excuse the language, you're most likely going to just talk about the first thing you can think of, and then try to basically navigate your way through the answer smoothly, but it probably won't be very smooth. And it'll be very apparent to the interviewer that that's what you're doing, right? So that's very basic, just like knowing what questions to expect. For our students that we work with, to be honest, we have them prepared for about 20 questions. And the way we came up with these 20 questions is, again, having seen hundreds of students go through these interviews with all the top banks, collecting data on what those banks have been asking in their interviews, because our students tell us, that gives us a pretty large sample size to know scientifically what these banks are actually asking, right? And then we've also pretty much tested this. Like if you have really good answers prepared for these 20 questions, can they always ask you something different? Yes, they can ask you stuff that's not the exact same questions on this list of 20 questions. However, typically any other question that they ask you is pretty much just going to be a variation of one of these 20 questions. Okay, so that's the first step, right? pretty much that prevents you from being caught off guard, right? And coming across as unprepared, right? The second step, once you know what questions the bankers are actually looking for, or what questions the bankers are actually going to ask, is knowing what the bankers actually want to hear. Okay, and this is important. I said knowing what the bankers want to hear, not what you think they want to hear, right? Because of course, we're always going to use what we think they want to hear, but a lot of the times, in our experience, what the students think the bankers want to hear is not what the bankers actually want to hear. Like, it's not what they're actually looking for, right? And so that becomes a problem because, and the reason that is a problem, by the way, is that behavioral answers are a lot more open-ended, right? There's no definitive right answer. There's no right or wrong answer. There are only better answers and worse answers, right? It's not like if you say these sentences in this order and you use these words, then you're going to get the job. And if you don't, then you won't. Like, everybody has their own unique set of stories and experiences that they have to share. And then how you package that together in a coherent and logical manner, it's going to be different for everyone, right? So knowing what the bankers want to hear is important because it's more subjective. The behavioral answers or the behavioral questions, but the quality of your answers is in the eye of the beholder, right? It's a bit more subjective than the technical answers, right? Although there are still certain things that bankers are always looking for. So this comes down to like getting inside the banker's head and knowing what it is that they want to hear. And then not that you should lie, because you should never lie in your answers, but how do you take what you've already done and then massage it and package it together in a way that gets them the qualities and the traits that they're looking for, right? And by the way, just a quick aside, for those of you that are sending in your behavioral answers, if you could do me a favor and also send me your resume as well, so that I just have context for all the things that you've done, because that's pretty important when it comes to tell me about yourself answer. Right? I won't show your resume on screen or anything. Like, people don't need to know who you are, but it'd just be good for me to have your kind of work history and all your extracurricular involvements and things like that. Okay, so that'll help me with the edits that I do for your answer. So send that over to me, and I'll take a look. But so coming back, so the first point, knowing what questions to expect. Second point, for each of those questions, knowing what it is that the bankers are looking for. And here again, you can't just guess, right? Don't just guess what you think the bankers want to hear, right? What you want to do is be as scientific about it as you possibly can. So the way we do it is we've actually looked at all the behavioral answers for our clients because we help them come up with their answers, right? And then we also know after the fact which client ended up at which bank, right? So then we can take all of the students that have the most successful outcomes, the ones who ended up at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Evercore and Centerview and JP Morgan, like those are all banks that we place people into. We look at those people who had the best outcomes. We compare their answers side by side. And obviously they all have different answers, right? Or they're not going to be 100% the same, right? So they all have slightly different answers, but there are commonalities, right, between each of their answers. So basically it's doing the pattern recognition off of as large of a sample size as possible to see what are the commonalities between all these most successful answers, because success leaves clues, right? Once we do that, we know, okay, for tell me about yourself, these are the components, these are the elements that you got to have, right? For, why do you want to do investment banking? These are the things that, people usually talk about when they get really, really good offers, right? Tell me about your greatest weakness. Okay, these weaknesses tend to work pretty well, right? Like, so whatever it may be, having that scientific approach, having that large sample size of data to go off of is very important so that you're not just guessing, right? Because if you're just guessing, then again, you're still just going off of what you think they want to hear, not what they actually want to hear, right? So then we're just back at square one, right? So that's the second point. The third step in the process is once you know the list of questions, and once you uh, know what it is that the bankers actually want to hear, then what you can do, or the next thing you have to do, is you need to know um, how good your answers are relative to your competition's answers. Okay. So this is probably a step that a lot of people skip. Okay. Because um, they just, first of all, it's hard to figure out what the competition is doing, right? Like, it's not like your competition is just going to tell you or try to help you and say, oh, yeah, this is exactly how we answer these, how I answer this question. Feel free to take my answer and go reference it, or go make yours better, right? At the end of the day, investment banking is pretty cutthroat, and everybody is kind of looking out for themselves, right, for the most part. And so most people, they just know what they're going to say for their answers. But if I were to ask them, like, hey, how well do you think your answers stack up against everyone else's answers, like everyone else from your school and your class who you're going to be competing with, most people have no idea, right? Because they don't know how good other people's answers are, and they don't know what other people are saying. So you sometimes, you might have like a roommate, or a friend or two, or people in your clubs. You might do a mock interview with them here and there, and then so maybe you have a small sample size of data, like one or two people, or two or three people, or whatever. But that's still a very small sample size, right? And you know, you're not really, like, it's not enough for you to go off of to definitively say, okay, yeah, because I'm better than these two other people, I think I'm better than these two other people. That means that I'm going to be in the top, 5% of the candidate pool, or however many people who actually get these jobs, right? So again, what we do is we actually have, for example, we have a client a couple years ago who went through interviews with every single bulge bracket and elite boutique bank, right? Every single one. He got invited to every single interview. He advanced to every single super day, so he passed all of the first round interviews. And then he went to the first 4 super days that he got invited to, and he got all 4 offers. And then he canceled the rest of his super days because at that point he already had offers from Goldman, from Evercore, I think it was like Citi and Pearl Lumber, right? And so when we saw that, we said, okay, well, clearly whatever this guy's doing is working, right? Because he has a 100% success rate with passing these interviews. So if there was anyone that we would want our other students to model themselves after, if there's anyone that we wanted to use as an example for other people to emulate or benchmark themselves against, this person would be it, right? So we actually have a mock interview that we recorded with this specific student who had a 100% success rate after the fact. Okay, we recorded this mock interview with him after he finished recruiting, because we basically said, hey, your results are amazing. Can we please do a mock interview with you so that our other clients can actually reference, or just like get to see how you're answering these questions, and not just what he's saying, but also how he's saying it. Right? It's not just the content, but also the delivery, right? The tonality, the cadence. It's the whole package, right? So that's what our clients are doing, because at that point, once you come up with your answers, most of the time, if you're not doing this comparison, you're usually going to be pretty pleased with your own answers, because if you weren't, then that wouldn't be your answer in the first place, right? Like, you wouldn't have come up with that answer, right? And so whatever is, if there was a way to make your answer better, is probably something that's in your blind spot. Until you see how someone else does it, you're not going to be able to just like all of a sudden notice it, right? Or be aware of it. Because if you could, then you would have already done it in the first place, right? Now, so that's the third step. And then the last step, the fourth step, and this is the fourth and final step before we go into the live edits. So again, if you guys want me to do the live edit for you guys, feel free to submit your answer, and I'll pick one and do it at the end of this call. Okay. Now, the last step, the fourth and last step is once you've done all of that, you still want to get feedback on your answers, right? Ideally, not just any feedback, but professional feedback from someone who has actually seen a lot of different people's answers, right? From someone who has seen a large sample size of like data on in terms of like what works and what doesn't work, right? And then for someone to basically be that extra set of eyes for you and point out the things that you might not notice on your own, right? And so what we do for our clients there is like we actually will go through and edit all of their answers line by line, right? Like just go into the Word doc and directly rewrite everything for them, right? We haven't seen anyone else do that, quite frankly, just because it's a lot of work. Like most people just don't have the time to do that for you, right? And so we'll actually do that. And so based on our experience and having edited hundreds of these answers, we pretty much know right away if your answer is good or not. And if it's not good, like what needs to be better about it, right? And a lot of the times for our students, what happens is once we've looked at their answers, it's like this eye-opening moment where they're like, oh yeah, like obviously, like why didn't I think of that, right? And it's not your fault that you didn't think of that, but usually like whatever not mistakes, but like whatever improvements we identify and call out, we're calling it out because you couldn't see that in the first place, right? So you can't expect yourself to be the one to critique your own answers. It's just like if you write an essay for your English literature class, your professor's not going to say, hey, everybody go grade your own essays, right? Because everyone will get A's, right? Because you're the author, you're the person who wrote the essay in the first place, right? So it's the same thing with your behavioral answers, right? So anyway, those are the 4-step process. So again, to recap, the first step is know what questions to expect. Second step is know what the bankers are actually looking for, not what you think they're looking for, but know what they're actually looking for by getting inside of their head. The third step is know how you stack up against the competition, okay? Not just how good you think your answers are, but how good are your answers actually relative to not just any competition, but find the toughest competition that you could have out there and benchmark yourself against them, right? And then the fourth and final step is get professional feedback on your answers so that you're not critiquing your answers on your own. Okay, so those are the 4 steps. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully that makes sense. Pretty sure most of you guys are not doing that right now. And so, if you're not doing that, you got to ask yourself, why not? And really, I highly, highly encourage you guys to implement the system, right? And if you don't know how to implement the system on your own and you want help doing that, like obviously, like I said, we've done this many, many times. We've done this hundreds of times with very high success rate, over 90%. And so feel free to reach out to us if you want us to help you with it. I left a link to book a free strategy session with our team in the description of this live stream, right? It's just www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. So if you guys want, you can book a free 45-minute strategy session with our team so we can learn more about your situation. Like we don't have time to help every single person. So this is because it takes a lot of time. We spend hours and hours and hours helping everyone that we work with. But this 45-minute call is basically our way to learn more about your situation, understand what your goals are, understand what challenges you're currently having and what you need help with, and then basically figure out if we're the best fit to help you. And if we are, then walk you through what that might look like and how we think we might be able to help you get to the outcome that you want. Or if we don't think we're the best fit to help you, which happens sometimes too, like I said, we don't work with the vast majority of the people that we talk to, then we'll actually just give you some advice instead on what we think you should do instead. Okay, so that's available to all of you. If you guys want to do it, feel free to go through the link in the description and book that call. So next up, let's go through this, the live edit of this answer that you guys submitted. So I just picked one that came in, and let me put it up on the screen so that you guys can see it. Tell me about yourself. Okay, cool. So here's the answer that was submitted. So let's just go through this. I'm gonna track the changes here. So let me read through it one time first. Typically when we edit these answers, we like to read through it, the whole thing, and then come back and do a second pass and then do the actual edits. Okay, so my name is X, I'm from Y, so not that far from NYU. And my first experience with business was actually when a friend and I started our own personal training business back in high school. Okay. Our main goal was to provide an inclusive workout environment for senior citizens in our community. But being the high schoolers that we were, it took a lot of trial and error and learning as we went. Over the course of a year, however, we were fairly successful, having over 30 clients and grossing a couple $1,000s a month. So when it came time for college applications, I knew I wanted a more formalized education to really understand how businesses derive value. And so with that, I was fortunate enough to be accepted into NYU Stern, where I now study finance and quantitative economics. Once I got there, my first internship was at Local Locker. Okay. A self-storage startup that converts rundown and unused buildings into storage units. Being familiar with entrepreneurship, I was really fascinated with what I was learning, and I was able to learn how much larger startups operated. I particularly got, I think you meant just how, but that's fine, it's very minor, how larger startups operated. I particularly got interested in the financing of the business and was able to coordinate with investors for our first seed funding round. Okay. With that experience, I knew that finance was something that I was interested in So going into my freshman summer, I was determined to learn more about it. I was given an opportunity to intern at Veritaxis Capital, a multi-strategy digital asset hedge fund. The coolest part of this internship was not only was I learning a lot of the finance and trading strategies, but also was able to dabble with emerging technologies and fintech. As a part of the internship, I was matched with a mentor who was a portfolio manager named Ed Chin. Not only did he show me the ropes when it came to learning finance and constructing trades, but he also spent close to a decade in investment banking, so I was able to learn from his perspective. In our conversations, he brought up how investment banking taught him how to understand how businesses derive value and how that fundamental understanding continued to guide his trading strategies. That's what developed my interest in investment banking. Being able to understand how businesses derive value was why I came to Stern in the first place. But more importantly, being able to create impact in a client-facing role is exactly what I was trying to do back when I had my personal training business in high school. So currently, what I'm trying to do is talk to as many professionals in the field to try to get a sense of their experience. So thank you again for getting on the phone with me. Okay. So first of all, I won't say your name, but look at your resume. It's a great resume, man. So well done. Good school, good GPA, lots of good relevant experience, good extracurriculars. I'm actually, yeah, I was in the same extracurricular activity as you in college, so that's cool. I won't say what it is because I don't want to reveal your identity, but great resume and great answer, actually. This is a really, really good answer, okay? So maybe, I don't know if that's what you expected to hear, but if it wasn't, then now you know. If it is, then you've been validated, right? I don't have a whole lot of feedback on what to do better, but I'll give you maybe one or two minor things. I think the biggest thing I will call out is right here where you said, I particularly got interested in the financing of the business and was able to coordinate with investors for our first seed funding round. I would have been curious to know like what this means exactly. Like you don't have to get into the weeds on every little thing you did because this answer is not the right place to do it. But when you just say coordinate with investors, that's very vague, right? So I think you can be a bit more specific Not too specific, like they can always ask follow-up questions, but you can be a bit more specific with this part. And then I think also, I think in the beginning, I love this example, by the way, talking about how you started a business back in high school. It shows that you're business minded. And also it's a very unique business because it's a workout environment for senior citizens, which is not really something that you think of. Like no one else is saying anything remotely close to this, right? So that makes it more memorable, right? So I love that. I think somewhere up in here where you talked about starting your own business and that whole experience, and grossing a couple $1,000s a month, I think weaving in the fact that that's when you realize how important it is to, how important like the finance aspect of running a business is, right? Like if you don't understand the drivers of your revenue, if you don't understand, where your costs are coming from, if you don't understand fixed costs versus variable costs, operating leverage, if you don't understand those things, it's very hard to run a successful business, right? You don't have to say it in that many words, but that's the point that basically you're trying to make. And so if you can weave that in up here, then down here when you say, I particularly got interested in the financing of the business, or maybe you can do it down here too, either up here or down here. But I think saying that basically explains why you're more interested in the finance side of the business, right? Because I understand what you're trying to do with this is you're trying to basically segue or transition from this entrepreneurial experience to your finance experience or your hedge fund experience, right? So you have to explain why you became interested in finance specifically, right? So I think you have the right idea, but in terms of execution, like I think that could be a small slight improvement, right? What I really like about your answer, so I think those are like the main feedback that I have for you. And then, obviously I see on your resume that you also have an upcoming sophomore summer internship at a private equity firm, which is great. And so what you should do is, I don't think you mentioned that anywhere, right? And you probably wrote this answer before you got that internship, I'm assuming. And so that's probably why it's not in here. But I would just drop, one sentence about that toward the end of your answer to make sure that just it's a part of your story, because that's relevant, right? Now, let me break down your answer a bit more, just not for your sake, because I think you wrote this answer, and like I said, it's a pretty good answer. So I think you already understand what you're doing and why you're doing the things that you're doing. But for everyone else that's watching, for their benefit, why do I say this is a good answer? So let me break down the structure of this answer for you guys so you guys can try to emulate this, okay? So you always start with who you are, where you're from, right? That's like very standard thing to do, right? Then what he did was he had a unique personal identifier, okay? This part right here about starting a business to help senior citizens work out, that's a personal unique identifier that helps this interviewer remember you, right? Because what you guys have to keep in mind is most of the time when these interviewers are doing interviews, they're not just interviewing you, they're interviewing multiple students back to back to back in the same day, right? Like they'll just block out whoever's responsible for interviewing. They'll usually block out, like back when we did on-campus recruiting, like we'll block out an entire day and we'll just interview, 8, 9, 10 students or however many students at a time. So it's really easy actually by the end of that entire process for all of you to just kind of blur together, so to speak. It's like, who's that guy again? Right? Like they see your name, like when they get in the room afterwards and they're deliberating, like who's that person again? And if they don't remember you, especially like because a lot of the students, what they're doing is they're reading the same interview guides that everybody else is reading. And the interview guides say, you should say this, right? And everybody kind of sounds the same because they're all just regurgitating what's in those guides. That's just, you're just going to blend in with everyone else, right? So here, what he's doing is by having this really unique experience about him, and it's not just any unique experience, like don't just say something weird for the sake of being weird, right? Like it actually is relevant because it also demonstrates his interest in business, right? And shows that he's entrepreneurial minded, right? And so he's accomplishing multiple things at once, right? So that was really, really good. I really like this example. And then he transitioned that to when it came time for college applications. I knew I wanted more formalized education to really understand how businesses derive value. And so that's why he decided to go to NYU Stern, right? So now he's explaining like, okay, this is why I went to NYU. And he's being very concise about it. Spend no more than 2 sentences on that, right? Also, one thing that I don't know if you guys noticed this with this answer is that he does a very, very good job of having transitions in between everything, going from point A to point B to point C to point D. Like there is a logical progression, not just a logical progression, but also like there's connective tissue between every single thing he talked about, right? It wasn't just like this choppy thing where sometimes when people give this answer, or whether it's tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume, like they'll just, it's almost like they're just reading off the list of items on their resume. You know, oh, so then I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I interned here, and I interned here. Like the interviewer has your resume in front of them already. They can read, right? Like they can read for themselves, and so they're not interested in just hearing you rehash what's already in writing on paper. What they want is the context around it. They want to understand the why. They want to understand the rationale behind why you did what you did, because the rationale part is what's not on the resume, because the resume is just factual. It's just stating your accomplishments, right? And so this answer does a really good job because that connective tissue, like he really explains why he went from each thing to the next, right? He decided to go to NYU Stern because he wanted to learn more about business, right? And he wanted to learn more about business. Or let me start from the beginning. He started business, and that sparked his interest, which is why he wanted to go to NYU Stern, right? Then when he got to NYU Stern, you know, he did an internship at another slightly bigger startup, because obviously he's already business minded. We know that because he had his own startup, right? But then he tried to transition from that to finance by what we talked about earlier, which is he explained how he got interested in the financing side of business. He worked on, you know, the fundraising for the business, right? Then that's why he went and got an internship at a hedge fund, right? And then he talked about, and by the way, the hedge fund is his most relevant experience to date. I mean, his summer internship that's coming up is going to be even more relevant because it's a private equity firm, but he hasn't done that yet, so he can't really talk too much about that, right? So for now, he spends the meat of his answer going deeper into the most relevant experience that he has, which is exactly what you should be doing, right? But also, the thing that he did here was he talked about, you know, what he learned, and at least like the relevant parts of what he learned, you know, in terms of like the finance and trading strategies, right? But he then transitioned that from that to investment banking by talking about how his mentor was in investment banking for a decade, and his mentor was the one who kind of exposed him to this industry, right? In our conversation, he brought up how investment banking taught him how to understand business, the right value, how to fundamentally understand continued guided trading strategies. And then this is, I mean, I really like this first example. I really like the way this answer started, and I really like the way that this answer ended. Okay, because, and what I like about the way that the answer ended is that he kind of closed the loop on a lot of the things that he talked about before, right? It's almost like he came full circle, right? Being able to understand how businesses derive value. So now by the way, he's also weaving in why investment banking, right? Which a lot of times, like if you don't touch on this at all in your first answer, then usually that'll become the next question that they ask you. It's like, well, why are you interested in investment banking, right? He's kind of preempting that by saying, well, that's why I got interested in investment banking, right? One, being able to understand how businesses derive value was why I came to Stern in the first place. So he's pointing back to decisions that he made in the past as proof for why he's actually interested in banking. So That's good, right? And then secondly, but more importantly, being able to create impact in a client-facing role is exactly what I was trying to do back when I had my personal training business in high school. Again, he's going back to the beginning and pointing to this business that he started, right? So this is what I mean by full circle is like, you see how he opened with this, and then he's closing with this, and he's almost like going back and kind of like reminding them again of what he started with, right? And so this is what I mean when I always tell our clients, like when they're working on their behavioral answers, is show, don't tell, right? Don't just tell people why you want to do something or why you're interested in banking. Like show them by pointing to things that you've done in the past that actually support that claim. Because if you can show them with actual concrete examples of things that you've actually done, then it's a lot more credible. It's a lot more convincing, right? Like no one's going to dispute the fact that he actually started a business, right? And no one's going to dispute the fact that he goes to NYU Stern, right? And so it's very believable versus if you just said, oh yeah, I'm really interested in investment banking because, you know, whatever you want to say. It's like, you know, I just think that the work is super exciting and you just get to learn so much. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but anyone can say that, right? How do I know that you really actually care about that? You're just telling me, you're not showing me, right? So show, don't tell. Always remember that, right? But he came full circle. He closed the loop, which just gives the interviewer this feeling of completeness, if that makes sense, right? So currently what I'm trying to do is talk to as many professionals in the field as possible. So I think he's probably using this for his networking conversations. But, you know, if this were an actual interview setting, then, you know, he would just tweak this slightly and say, you know, so that's what brings me here today. You know, this is why I'm really excited about a firm like Goldman Sachs or whatever. And so, you know, thank you for having me or whatever, right? So this answer is like very, very, very close to, I mean, I'm almost like wondering, is like, this is almost like exactly to the T of how we teach our clients to do it, right? So it was like, whoa, are you already in Wall Street Mastermind? No, I'm just kidding. I know you're not, but job well done. I don't think you really need to change too much about it. Even like the one or two small things that I gave you, I think those are just, you know, minor optimizations. So just keep doing what you're doing, man. Like I said, your resume looks great. You got good GPA, good experience. Looks like you're well prepared in terms of your answers. So I think you'll do quite well in the investment making recruiting process. To be completely honest with you, man. So hopefully that helps. So let me come back here and I have 7 minutes. So I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. Okay. So if anyone here has questions about anything we've talked about today related to behavioral interviews, feel free to drop your questions down below in the comment, whether you're on Facebook or you're on LinkedIn or you're on YouTube, doesn't really matter. I'm checking all the comments in all three places. But if you drop a comment down below, I'll try to answer as many questions as I can in the last few minutes that we have here. While you guys are doing that, since it does take a few minutes, for those of you who thought that was helpful and maybe you want a similar type of help with your answers, or, I mean, look, if your answers are that good, like, then you're probably in good shape. But most of you, if your answers are not in that shape, but you want help getting your answers to the shape that answer was in, and like I said, like, that's pretty much exactly what we help our students with, right? So if that's something that you want to do, again, first step would be for you to go and book a free strategy session with our team. Free 45-minute call for us to just hop on and learn more about your recruiting situation and what it is that you need help with and what goals you're trying to accomplish, and figure out if or how we can help you, okay? Or at a minimum, just give you some advice. So if you want to do that, go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply, and you can go ahead and book that call at a time that works for you, okay? So if anyone has a question, again, feel free to drop it down in the comment section. I'm going to hit refresh on all my screens just to make sure I'm not missing any of them. But if I don't see any questions, then we'll just wrap it up here for this week. So let me refresh these screens. All right, guys, last call. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I'm just kidding. Okay. I refreshed all of my windows and I don't really see any questions. So if there are no other questions, then we'll wrap it up here a couple minutes early. Hopefully you guys found this to be helpful. And we'll be back again with more of these trainings same time next week. So until then, keep grinding, everyone, and best of luck to all of you.